Here we go for Pharmacy Law Exam 1 review. This one's kind of long, but I think it's very important because law is where you will find the most difficult questions on the CERT exam. That's why I constantly say time and time again where brain generic and math are really the easiest ones because you know how to calculate them, you know how to do them. But the pharmacy law, you really have to just know. So luckily, this first one, it's pretty straightforward because I know a lot of you have probably heard these terms before in your just day-to-day lives. So first one, a healthcare provider attempts to administer a medically required medication to an adult patient, but the patient protests as this occurs. This is an example of which of the following torts. So it's going to be assault. So assault basically means that the person does not want it. If they threaten it, then it will be like sort of like an attack on them. So this basically means that the patient has every right to refuse. And if you were to say like you are going to get it anyways, that would be assault. So just make sure to understand that consent is very important in the medical field. A pharmacy technician should understand the court system of the United States and which type of law. So in the United States, we have both civil and criminal. And so think to yourself, can a pharmacy technician do anything where they would have civil implications, and then can they do anything that would have criminal implications? So the answer is yes to both of those. That's why it's so important that you think to yourself, what am I doing? Am I confident about it? Can it hurt anyone? Should I ask for another opinion? Don't ever be unsure of anything you do because it could be both criminal and civil. A serious crime such as rape or murder is classified as so this is the worst possible thing in the United States, judicial system. This is going to be a felony. Rape, murder, etc. So this could include things like, let's say, felony drug charges. If you are caught stealing, exorbitant amounts of narcotics and selling them, and you're being, dangerous in your actions and stuff like that, it could be constituent of a felony. So understand it's not just for those types of crimes. A tort is defined as a injury to a person by another person. So tort is injury to a person by a person. So when you think of medical malpractice, you should think of tort. This is tort law. Administrative law focuses on the regulations set forth and enforced by governmental administrative agencies. So you should think of administrative law is things like, the DEA, the FDA, all those things are governmental administrative agencies. An alleged defendant means a wrongdoer. So in the court of law in the United States, when you are a defendant, you are defending yourself from being found guilty. Because in America, we are, proven, innocent until proven guilty. So that's usually what they call a defendant. So this is someone that is accused of being a wrongdoer. Any statement about a person that harms his or her reputation is referred to as defamation. So defamation is basically saying anything that could harm someone's reputation, whether it be true or false. It's usually, labeled as defamation. Assault, battery, and fraud are examples of intentional torts. So you should think of if I am assaulting someone or committing battery against someone, usually that means that I am making a conscious decision of harming them. So when it comes to things like medical malpractice, where maybe it was an honest accident, but it still happened and someone was injured, that might be considered an unintentional tort, or maybe even negligence. Attempted burglary is an example of a misdemeanor. So attempted burglary, maybe that means someone tries to break into someone's house, they couldn't quite open the door, but then they were still arrested. They could be charged with attempted burglary, which is a misdemeanor. Civil law encompasses the breach of law known as negligence. So civil law covers negligence, and that could be things like, torts. So civil is not necessarily criminal. Civil wrongs are often called torts, right? Torts could be anything that happens to a person by a person. Criminal law governs the violations of the law that are punishable as offenses against society. So the reason that, the overall reason that this exists is to make sure that society is redeemed by punishing the criminal. So criminal law governs violations against the society. Domestic violence is an example of a felony. So that is an example of a serious charge. Failure to exercise reasonable care is referred to as negligence. And so I think I talked about that in our CERT review, exam 1 review. So anything that is basically not doing your job or not doing your job adequately could be described as negligence. So negligence is defined as failure to use reasonable care. And now the keyword there is reasonable care. Basically, you will sit in front of a panel of maybe people that are pharmacy technicians as well, and they would say, I would have done, X, Y, and Z, or, they should have done this, and then they'll define what reasonable care was. And then if you're found going against that, it would be negligence. How long does a Supreme Court justice serve? And most of you should know this. It is for his or her lifetime. So I think that the most recent thing that comes to mind is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she served for a very long time because it's a lifelong position. If a conflict exists between federal and state law, which type of law outweighs the other and must be enforced? And you should probably know this, because obviously we live in the United States of America. Even though we live in Texas, the United States law will trump or outweigh state law. So federal law is going to outweigh state. In a civil law case, the party who loses cannot be imprisoned if he or she is unable to pay damages. So basically, this is just saying that if someone is taken to civil law and found wrong and they have to pay a fine, it doesn't mean they have to go to jail if they can't pay. In a criminal law case, who can appeal a guilty verdict? Only the defendant. So this basically means if I am defending myself against a crime and I am found guilty, it's not like the person who is going against me can be like, okay, well, we want to get him for more. I am the only one who can be like, I want a retrial. I want to say something else. I can only appeal the verdict. In a criminal law case, who is the plaintiff? So, criminal law, who is plaintiff? And remember, plaintiff is the opposite of defendant, and if defendant is the person who did the crime, usually the plaintiff is going to be the government. So usually you can see things in like law cases that are, some name versus the federal court or name versus the state of Texas. Those are usually the plaintiff. The primary source of private law comes from court decisions. So Court decisions usually are where things like private laws are defined, whether they be states, statutes, common law. Usually the source of those is private law. Which of the following classifications of civil law governs intentional or unintentional acts that cause harm to a person or damage to a property? This is going to be another one of the examples of a person harming a person, which is another example of tort law. Which of the following individuals may ultimately decide that a case will be heard by the Supreme Court? So this decision, as you could probably guess, is determined to the Supreme Court justices. They get to decide what the Supreme Court hears. So it's very important that the Supreme Court justices, have a wide range of interests. Obviously, because if they don't, certain cases are not ever going to be heard. So it has to be approved by them to be heard in the Supreme Court. Which of the following is not an area of criminal law? So not an area of criminal law, it would be private law. Because criminal law usually is involving the state or federal government. Private law is usually between, citizens, individual people. So which of the following is written defamation? So remember, defamation is going against someone, harming their reputation. Written is referred to as libel. Libel. There are different forms of defamation. I'll go ahead and just say it. We're talking about things like slander, which is verbal. Okay. So if you slander someone, if you're basically using your words and saying things that are harming their reputation, if you are actually writing things that could be libel. A lot of people have been taken to court recently for posting on Facebook and social media, because that can actually be used against you in cases of libel or defamation. Which of the following statements is true regarding the differences between federal and state law? Once again, federal and state courts are independent. Like I said that sort of backwards. So they are not independent, whereas the federal court can hear state courts' cases, obviously, because there's some overlap on those. And then federal courts handle crimes under statutes that have been enacted by Congress. So what this means is if Congress passes a law, obviously federal courts handle crimes under those laws. A feeling of sorrow for someone resulting from sensitivity to his or her problems is called sympathy. As it says, or as it's stated, feeling of sorrow for someone, sympathy. A person who acquires specialized knowledge and conforms to the technical and ethical standards of her occupation are usually described as a professional. So basically the key word here is going to be conforms to the technical and ethical standards of their occupation. It's going to be a professional. The allegiance to a cause, ideal, custom, institution, or product is referred to as loyalty. So a lot of times this can be, maybe someone is resounding with a cause for some organization that they work for, or maybe an idea that they have. Usually that's referred to as loyalty. Breach of confidentiality. So breach of confidentiality is referred to non-intentional tort. So I will say it could probably be described as an intentional tort if they took you to court and you realize Maybe you work for a company, let's say you work for Apple, and you are in the team that's designing the iPhone 15, and you happen to let out something that is confidential, that you signed a paper saying you will not disclose what you're working on. That could be considered a breach of confidentiality. Maybe it wasn't your fault, maybe it was your fault. Usually that will be described or determined in court, but we're talking about it being non-intentional in this case. Disclosing unpleasant information to a patient is best supported by the concept of, so, unpleasant, so disclosing veracity. So veracity is the concept that will help, disclose that information. So patients deserve to hear the truth all the time. So even if it is, kind of a tough decision, it's important that healthcare providers be straightforward and ultimately tell them what's going on with them. Remember that the abbreviation HIPAA, a lot of people want to put PPAA, is going to be the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. How many D's of negligence are defined? So there are 4 D's of negligence. And they are, we have duty of care, we have dereliction, we have direct cause, and we have damages. If a patient asks for a service that you believe is morally wrong, you should. Now, this is one of the things that it's kind of an ethical decision, but the best course of action would be to tell the pharmacist how you feel. So let's say, for example, and I'm just sort of putting the scenario out there, let's say, for example, you don't necessarily believe in the use of birth control. And let's say that you tell the pharmacist, I'm not comfortable with dispensing this, I'm not comfortable with, even possessing this. If I have a patient that is picking this up, do you mind if I let someone else take over? Because I'm not comfortable with this based on my beliefs. Now, the wrong answer to do this would be to, refuse to help the patient at all, refuse to tell the pharmacist, refuse to tell anyone, and then keep the opinion to yourself, because obviously your opinion is just as important as someone else's, and your belief are just as important as anyone else. So pretty much the best course of action would be to explain your concern, explain what's going on with you. If the pharmacy technician believes that the employer is participating in unethical behavior, the first course of action should be, so the number one thing here is to be absolutely sure of the facts and circumstances. Now, this once again is an ethical situation where it's like, if you aren't sure, you need to be sure before you make any accusations, because these accusations can be very serious if there is, maybe there's a miscommunication. Maybe you don't understand fully what's going on. And if you make that accusation, if you go down that route, then it could be bad for the pharmacist. Maybe they're wrongfully fired. Maybe even you could be wrongfully fired for accusing them of something. So basically be absolutely sure of the facts and circumstances. In the pharmacy, how are technicians generally insured? Usually this is where most of the technicians are insured as they are employed. It's usually going to be under the malpractice insurance of their employers. So many people, like pharmacy chains, as soon as you are employed, you sort of sign a paper saying that you're being covered by their malpractice insurance. Sometimes you have to actually consider, do I have malpractice insurance? If something happens, will I be covered as far as my legal protection? Okay. Let's see. Liability for injuries to patients may include all the following except it's going to be the physician's right to practice. So the word liable. The word liable basically means that you are accountable under law. So you probably have heard, I refuse all liability, or you're signing your liability away. And it's basically mean you are accepting the consequences under law. Prescribing of medications by a person who is not licensed to do so is described by which of the following terms? And this is one I'm going to write. So, prescribing of medications by a person who is not licensed to do so is called, and it's not the name, the Disney movie, but is malfeasance. For some reason, when I look at that word, I want to say maleficent, but it's malfeasance. This question, I hope that you know what the word fidelity means, but to be fidelity or to be fidelis means that you are being faithful and loyal. Showing loyalty to your pharmacist is called fidelity. The American healthcare system is based upon ensuring, and now you could basically fill in the blank with whatever you want, but the most important thing that we're focused on is the rights of patients. So it's very important that the rights of patients are upheld. So this goes back to if your patient doesn't want something and you say, well, you're going to get it anyways, that's going against the right of a patient. So that's going to be the basis of American healthcare. The cost of medical insurance has increased astronomically because what? Well, because litigation is expensive. So litigation is the legal process, and as you know, the legal process is very slow. With slow comes expenses, and because you pay for a lawyer by an hour. So the reason that medical insurance is increasing is because so many people are suing, so many people have to have lawyer representation. Litigation is expensive. The document that expresses the wishes of patients in case of terminal illness or accident, after which patients cannot express their wishes is called a living will. So this is going to be something that they're going to write, that they're going to say, this is my living will. I wish to express this, this, and this. Just remember the difference between that and power of attorney. Power of attorney is for when the person is not decapitated, but decapacitated. So meaning they can't make the decision, meaning they aren't dead and they still can express, but maybe they can't at the moment. The exchange of gifts or money exemplifies serious ethical issues. And usually this goes back to the old days where, like drug reps would come into pharmacies and talk to pharmacists and be like, hey, if you sell my drug, I'm going to give you, free tickets to, so-and-so concert, and we're going to play golf every Friday for free. Usually that can be related to serious ethical issues. The failure to perform an act that should have been performed is called nonfeasance. So, failure to perform an act that should have been is called non-feasance. The legal relationship between the pharmacist and the patient is usually guided by medical ethics. So, legal relationship between the pharmacist and the patient is guided by medical ethics. This one is a Latin phrase. I'm going to go ahead and write it. So it is res ispa loquitur. It means the thing speaks for itself. So usually it's when they cannot prove negligence without the available direct evidence. So not good. Doesn't happen very often. Not good. The principle of doing good, which means that patients must not be harmed while they are being treated, is the principle of beneficence. So meaning that we're out there, trying to do good. We're trying to improve the condition of our patients. This is going to be the principle of beneficence. The study of value and morality is called ethics. So people who are focused on ethics are thinking about the value of morality. Theories of liability are divided into 3 types. So we have intentional torts. So liability has 3 types. We have intentional torts. We have unintentional torts. And we have breach of contract. So, statute of limitations is not one of those liability types. What is the most common period of time, which could also mean statute of limitations, for filing a professional negligence lawsuit? So the most common period of time for filing a professional lawsuit is 2 years. Which of the following damages are not usually involved in medical malpractice? Usually this is punitive, which means punishment. What that means is we are setting a fee, we're going above and beyond to make sure they never do this again. Usually medical malpractice is something that, they were made aware of. We found them guilty. We're just going to pay the damages and that's it. We're not going to go above and beyond to punish them. Which of the following groups are protected by privileged communication statutes? And it's going to be patients. Which of the following has increased dramatically in recent years in the United States? Just like we were talking about, the reason that medical insurance is so expensive is because the litigation process is expensive. So malpractice insurance has also gone through the roof. Malpractice insurance it has to be high nowadays because we live in a society that loves suing people. Which of the following is an intentional tort? So intentional meaning that you set out, you obviously did something consciously. This could be considered assault and battery. So assault and battery are conscious decisions to, intentionally wrong someone. Which of the following is the most critical point of discussion in the relationship between patients and the pharmacist? And this revolves around a very important thing that the pharmacy technician does, which is ask for allergies. So allergies is a huge important discussion because there are some allergies out there that could end up in death. Just off the top of my head, we're talking about things like penicillin allergies. They could be life or death. Which of the following is the most important value in any pharmacy setting? So this one, once again, it could be whatever you value first or whatever your pharmacist or pharmacy values first. But usually it's going to be commitment to putting the patient first. And if you live by that, primarily there are a lot of things that are involved in putting the patient first. But that should be a very important value. Which of the following patient-physician relationship practices is unethical and illegal? So this goes back to a thing called kickback. And this is going to be referring the patient to a pharmacy that the physician owns. Obviously, because if the physician writes a prescription and then says, hey, you should go get it from this pharmacy, and come to find out they, have some, incentive as far as money, that's obviously wrong. There was a big problem there. Which of the following statements is correct regarding the statute of limitations? So this one is the period of time established by state law during which a lawsuit or criminal proceeding may be filed. So this period of time is not a standard. So it's going to be dependent on whatever state it is in. Which of the following terms represents guidelines for professionals that are designed primarily to ensure public safety? It's going to be codes. The stealing of property without consent of the owner is known as theft. That should be one that you're well aware of what it means. You know that theft is usually stealing property. The statute of limitations is generally from 1 year to 8 years. Adverse drug reactions and adverse treatment outcomes are examples of, this is informed consent. Now, the reason that it is informed consent is because usually when a patient picks up a prescription, let's say it's new to them, the most important thing that we can tell them as pharmacy technicians is, do you have any questions for the pharmacist? Would you like to speak to them about your new medication? If they say yes, then usually the pharmacist will say, these are the possible outcomes of taking this medication. This is to watch out for. That is going to be informing them. And so as soon as we inform them and then they have the discussion, do you have anything else or do you need any other clarification? That's going to be the patient informing of their consent. Administering a lethal drug to a patient in order to cause his or her death is called euthanasia. So that is the last question on this exam. So obviously, there are a few things that were left out because I think that there are a lot of terms which I think you're pretty familiar with. Things like ethics, morals, personal values, and things like that. Make sure to very carefully look through all of your mini exams that you took this week. Like I said, many of the questions that are on the mini exams are going to be on the test. So as you go through, make sure you are paying close attention to things that you may have struggled with. So anyways, that is it for the Pharmacy Law Exam 1 review. Thank you for watching and see you around.